The white room was cold and bright like a hospital on Earth, but this was not Earth. This was Space Station Omega-7 floating in the dark between stars. Dr. Hyun-woo Park stood next to a metal table that was longer than 3 cars put together. And on that table lay something that should not exist. The creature was huge, bigger than any animal Hyun-woo had ever seen. Its body was covered in scales that used to shine like green and gold metal, but now they looked gray and dull like old coins. Left in the rain, the thing had wings folded against its sides, and a long neck that ended in a head full of sharp teeth, but the teeth were not scary now because the creature was dying. Hyun-woo held a needle in his shaking hand. The needle was full of blue liquid that would make the creature stop thinking forever. The alien doctors said it was mercy. They said the creature was in pain, and this would make the pain go away, but Hyun-woo was not sure if that was true. The tall crystal being named Velthera stood behind him, watching with eyes that looked like cut diamonds. Velthera was the head doctor for all alien animals on the space station, and Velthera did not like humans very much, but the coalition government said humans had to help with this job because humans were good at killing things. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 10 years, and they were still the new kids. Nobody trusted them much, but they were useful for jobs that other aliens did not want to do, like putting down dangerous animals or cleaning up after wars. The creature on the table was called a space dragon by humans, but its real name was something with too many sounds for human mouths to make. The aliens said these dragons were older than most civilizations, and they used to fly between stars like birds flew between trees, but now there were only a few left, and this one was sick. Hyun-woo stepped closer to the dragon and raised the needle. The dragon's chest moved up and down very slowly, like it was having trouble breathing. Its eyes were closed, and Hyun-woo thought maybe it was already almost dead, but then something happened that changed everything. The dragon's eyes opened, and they were not the dull gray eyes of a dying animal. They were bright gold like liquid sun, and they looked right at Hyun-woo, not through him or past him, but right into him, like the dragon could see inside his mind and his heart and his soul. Then the dragon did something no one expected. It lifted one of its huge arms. The arm was as big as Hyun-woo's whole body and covered in scales that were starting to shimmer with their old colors again, and it wrapped that arm around Hyun-woo in what could only be called a hug. The touch was warm, not hot, but warm, like sitting next to a fireplace on a winter night. And suddenly Hyun-woo felt something flowing into his mind, pictures and feelings and memories that were not his own. He saw stars being born and planets forming and creatures flying through space without ships, just using their own wings and will. He saw Earth when it was young and covered in ice and fire, and he saw the dragons flying around it like guards protecting it from rocks that fell from space. He saw humans learning to make fire and tools, and the dragons watching from far away, making sure the humans stayed safe. But most amazing of all, he saw other worlds, other planets, where the dragons had done the same thing. They had protected and watched over dozens of different kinds of creatures, helping them grow and learn and become smart enough to reach for the stars themselves. The dragon showed him memories of great wars between different alien races and how the dragons had tried to stop the fighting by talking to the leaders in their dreams, giving them ideas for peace, but the wars happened anyway, and many dragons died trying to protect innocent people. Hyun-woo saw the truth about the coalition, the group of alien races that now ruled most of the galaxy. They had not invited humans to join because humans were special or good. They had invited humans because they wanted to use them and because they were afraid of what humans might become if the dragons kept protecting them. The coalition was made up of races that had stopped growing and learning long ago. They were comfortable and safe, but they were also scared of anyone who might become more than they were, and humans had something the dragons called the spark, the ability to keep growing and changing forever. As these visions filled Hyun-woo's mind, he felt his hand getting heavy. The needle felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and his finger would not push the button to inject the blue liquid into the dragon. The dragon was not just showing him memories, it was showing him hope. Thera made a sound like breaking glass and said something in the crystal language that Hyun-woo now somehow understood. It was an order to complete the injection to kill the dragon before it was too late, but too late for what. The dragon tightened its hug just a little, not to hurt Hyun-woo, but to keep him close and in his mind. Hien Wu heard a voice speaking without words telling him things that made his heart race and his eyes fill with tears. The voice told him that dragons were not animals, they were gardeners of consciousness. They helped other races remember how to grow beyond their physical bodies, beyond their fears, beyond their limits. They had been doing this work for millions of years, but now they were almost all gone. The coalition had been hunting them for centuries, not because dragons were dangerous, but because dragons helped other races become dangerous to the coalition's power. When a race remembered its true potential, it did not need rulers or masters or anyone to tell them what they could and could not do. Humans were the brightest spark the dragons had ever found, brighter than any other race in the galaxy, and that was why the coalition wanted to control them before they could learn what they really were. But this dragon had found a way to wake up at least one human. The injection fell from Hien Wu's hand and hit the floor with a sound like breaking crystal. Red lights started flashing all over the room and alarms began making loud noises that hurt his ears. But Hien Wu did not care, because he finally understood this was not about saving one dying dragon. This was about saving the future of every thinking being in the galaxy. The dragon was not dying, it was changing, and it was trying to help Hien Wu change to security. Guards would come soon, they would try to stop what was happening, but the dragon squeezed Hien Wu gently one more time, and he felt power flowing through him, power he had never imagined, power that had been sleeping in his blood and bones and brain since the day he was born. The dragon smiled, if a dragon could smile, and Hien Wu knew that everything was about to change, not just for him but for all humans everywhere. The real battle was about to begin. Security Chief Jin-A Kim ran through the metal hallways of Space Station Omega 7 as red warning lights flashed everywhere and alarms screamed like angry monsters. She had been in her office doing paperwork when every screen in the building started showing danger signals from the medical bay where Dr. Hien Wu was supposed to be putting down a sick space dragon. Jin-A had worked on space stations for 8 years, and she knew that when all the alarms went off at once, something very bad was happening. But when she reached the medical bay door and looked through the small window, what she saw made no sense at all. The dragon that had been gray and dying just minutes ago was now glowing like a star. Its scales were bright green and gold again, and it was sitting up on the metal table with one huge arm wrapped around Dr. Hien Wu, who was standing perfectly still with his eyes closed and a strange smile on his face. But that was not the strangest part. The strangest part was that both the dragon and Hien Wu were surrounded by a soft light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and every machine in the room was going crazy with numbers and readings that Jin-A had never seen before. She pushed the emergency button to open the door and ran inside, shouting for Hien Wu to get away from the creature. But when she got close, something amazing happened. She could feel something touching her mind like gentle fingers made of warm sunlight. Suddenly Jin-A was seeing things that were not there, or maybe they were there but hidden. She saw the space station as it really was, not just metal and air, but part of a huge web of energy that connected every living thing. She saw the stars outside not as distant lights, but as nodes in a network of consciousness that spread across the whole galaxy. The dragon turned its golden eyes toward her, and Jin-A felt a flood of knowledge pouring into her brain. She learned that dragons were not just big flying lizards. They were ancient beings who had been alive when the first stars formed, and their job was to help younger races grow and evolve and become more than they thought possible. She learned that every intelligent species in the galaxy had the ability to transcend their physical bodies and become pure consciousness, but most races had forgotten this or been made to forget it by others who wanted to keep them weak and controlled. The coalition of alien governments that ruled most of known space was not a collection of advanced civilizations helping each other. It was a prison system designed to keep every race from reaching their true potential, because the coalition leaders were afraid of what might happen if everyone became as powerful as they could be. Dragons had been trying to help species remember their true nature for millions of years by visiting their worlds and speaking to their greatest thinkers in dreams and visions. Many of humanity's greatest discoveries and inventions had come from dragon whispers, but the coalition had figured out what was happening. For the last 1,000 years, the coalition had been hunting dragons across the galaxy, capturing them and killing them. One by one, they told everyone that dragons were dangerous monsters that ate planets and destroyed civilizations, but that was all lies. Dragons had never hurt anyone who was not trying to hurt others first. Humans were different from every other race the dragons had ever met. Humans had what dragons called the infinite spark, the ability to keep growing and changing and becoming more powerful forever without any limits. Most races reached a point where they stopped evolving, but humans never would. That was why the coalition had invited humanity to join them, not because they wanted to be friends, but because they wanted to control humans before humans figured out what they really were. And the coalition plan was working. Humans had been part of galactic society for 10 years, and most of them still thought they were just smart apes with technology, but this dragon had found a way to wake up at least one human, and now Jin-A could feel the awakening spreading through her own mind like fire through dry grass. Her eyes started glowing with the same golden light as Haiyan Wu and the dragon, and she could suddenly do things she had never been able to do before. She could hear the thoughts of everyone on the space station. She could feel the electromagnetic fields that ran through the walls. She could sense the quantum fluctuations that held matter together, and most importantly, she could feel other humans throughout the galaxy starting to wake up as the dragon's call spread from mind to mind. Dr. Minho Lee, the station's chief researcher, came running into the medical bay with a neural dampener in his hands, a device designed to shut down telepathic abilities. But when he saw Jin-A and Haiyan Wu standing with the dragon, both of them glowing like small suns, he stopped and stared. The dragon looked at Minho with ancient patient eyes, and Minho felt the same gentle touch in his mind that the others had experienced. But he tried to resist it. He had been taught that telepathic contact with unknown aliens was dangerous and could drive humans insane. But the dragon was not trying to control his thoughts. It was trying to free them from the mental barriers that had been built into human DNA thousands of years ago by coalition scientists who had visited Earth in secret and changed human genetics to limit their potential. Minho felt those barriers breaking down, and suddenly he could remember things that had never happened to him, but had happened to his ancestors. He could remember the early days of human civilization when people could move objects with their minds and communicate across great distances without technology. He could remember the wars that had been fought on Earth between humans who still had their full abilities and those who had been changed by alien interference. He could remember how the unchanged humans had eventually lost and been driven into hiding while the changed humans forgot they had ever been different. But the dragon was undoing those changes, awakening the dormant parts of human consciousness that had been sleeping for thousands of years. And as more humans on the station began to feel the awakening, they started to understand that they were not just individuals anymore. They were part of something much larger, a collective human consciousness that was connected to the universal network of awareness that dragons had been protecting for millions of years. And through that network, they could feel the presence of other awakened beings across the galaxy. Some were dragons in hiding, some were members of other species who had managed to resist coalition control, and some were humans who had never lost their true abilities and had been waiting for the rest of humanity to remember what they really were. The dragon released its embrace of Haiyan Wu, but kept the mental connection strong, and through that connection it spoke to all three humans at once, not with words but with pure meaning, telling them that the easy part was over and the real work was about to begin. Other coalition forces were already on their way to the station with orders to destroy everyone aboard and claim it was an accident. But the awakened humans were no longer helpless. They had abilities that coalition science said were impossible, and they were about to prove that science wrong. The space station Omega-7 had automatic systems that were supposed to lock down everything when dangerous situations happened, but those systems were not working anymore because engineer Tae-Young Park had figured out how to talk to the computers with his mind instead of using keyboards and screens. Tae-Young had been in the engine room, checking fuel levels, when the awakening hit him like a wave of electricity flowing through his brain. Suddenly he could see the mathematical patterns that held the universe together, and he understood that consciousness was not something that happened inside brains. It was the basic foundation that everything else was built on. Within minutes of his awakening, Tae-Young had connected his mind directly to the station's computer network, and what he found there made him angry. The Coalition had been lying about everything. They had secret files that showed they knew exactly what dragons really were, and they had been planning to wipe out humanity. As soon as they finished using humans to hunt down the last dragons, but Tae-young also found something else hidden in the computer files. Locations of other dragons scattered across the galaxy. Most of them were hiding by pretending to be asteroids, or dead moons, or empty space, but they were all connected through the same network of consciousness that humans were now. Joining communications, Officer Yoon-ji. Song was in the radio room when her awakening began, and she discovered that her new abilities let her send messages faster than light without using any technology at all. She could project her thoughts directly through the quantum foam that filled empty space. Yoon-ji immediately started reaching out to other humans on different space stations and planets, and what she found amazed her. The awakening was spreading everywhere. Humans were waking up on Earth, on Mars, on the colony worlds, and on ships, traveling between the stars. Each newly awakened human became like a radio transmitter broadcasting the awakening signal to other humans, and the signal was getting stronger as more people joined the network. Soon there would be millions of awakened humans, and the Coalition would not be able to stop them, but the Coalition was not giving up without a fight. Crystal being Vel-Thara had called for emergency reinforcements, and 3 Coalition warships were already approaching the station with orders to destroy it, and everyone aboard before the awakening could spread any further. The dragon in the medical bay began to sing, not with its voice but with its mind, and the song was so beautiful that everyone on the station could hear it. The song told the story of the universe from the first moment of creation to the present day, and it explained how consciousness had split itself into countless pieces so it could experience existence from every possible perspective. Dr. Han-woo felt his connection to the dragon growing stronger, and through that connection he could sense other dragons throughout the galaxy starting to respond to the song. They had been hiding for so long that some of them had almost forgotten they were alive, but now they were remembering. One dragon that had been disguised as a small moon near Jupiter suddenly revealed its true form and began flying toward Earth. Another that had been sleeping inside an asteroid belt woke up and started heading for the nearest human colony. A third that had been hiding in the atmosphere of a gas giant spread its wings and soared toward the galactic core where the oldest human settlements were located. Security. Chief Jinna Kim found that her new abilities included something like super strength, but it was not her muscles that were stronger, it was her will. She could change the physical properties of matter just by concentrating hard enough. When she touched a metal wall, she could make it as soft as cloth or as hard as diamond. The 3 awakened humans in the medical bay realized they were no longer just individual people. They were part of a collective consciousness that included every awakened human and every dragon and every other evolved being in the galaxy, but they were still themselves with their own personalities and thoughts and feelings. This was not like the science fiction stories where everyone became the same person. It was more like being part of a huge orchestra, where every instrument played its own part, but together they made music that was more beautiful than any single instrument could create alone. The dragon showed them how to extend their consciousness beyond their physical bodies, and suddenly they could see through the eyes of awakened humans all over the galaxy. They could feel the fear and confusion of people who were just starting to wake up, and they could sense the desperate anger of Coalition leaders who were watching their control slip away through the network. They learned that Coalition forces were moving against awakening humans everywhere, not just on Space Station Omega 7, but on dozens of worlds and hundreds of ships. The Coalition had decided to solve the problem by killing everyone who had been affected, but they also learned that they were not alone. Other species throughout the galaxy had been waiting for this moment. Races that had pretended to be loyal to the Coalition while secretly maintaining their true abilities. They had been preparing for the day when someone would finally break the barriers that kept consciousness imprisoned. Ancient keepers who lived in the galactic core and looked like living trees had been storing the genetic patterns of every extinct species, waiting for the chance to bring them back. The deep swimmers who lived in the oceans of water worlds had been maintaining libraries of forbidden knowledge. The star dancers who lived in the empty spaces between galaxies had been protecting reality itself from Coalition experiments that tried to limit what was possible. All of these hidden allies began to reveal themselves as the dragon song spread across the galaxy, and the coalition suddenly found themselves facing not just awakened humans and a few dragons, but an alliance of every truly advanced species that had ever existed. Engineer Tae-young Park looked at his hands and watched as they began to glow with creative energy. He could feel the molecular structure of everything around him, and he realized that with enough focus he could reshape matter at the atomic level. He was not just an engineer anymore, he was becoming something like a god. The dragon in his mind warned him that power without wisdom was dangerous, and that the goal was not to become gods but to help everyone remember that they already were gods who had chosen to forget their true nature so they could experience what it was like to be limited and separate. The real battle was not going to be fought with weapons or ships. It was going to be fought in the realm of consciousness itself, and the outcome would determine whether the universe remained a prison where awareness was trapped in small separate boxes, or became a playground where infinite creativity could express itself through countless forms. As the first coalition warships appeared on the station sensors, the awakened humans prepared to show their former masters what they had really been suppressing all along. Admiral So Young Choi was having breakfast on her flagship New Seoul when the emergency message came through the quantum communicator. The message was from Security Chief Jin-A Kim on Space Station Omega 7, and what Jin-A said made So Young drop her coffee cup and stare at the screen in shock. Jin-A told her that everything they had been taught about dragons was a lie, that the coalition had been using humanity as dragon hunters while secretly planning to eliminate all humans, and that right now coalition warships were preparing to destroy the station and everyone on it to cover up the truth. So Young had been in the human defense fleet for 15 years, and she had always been proud to serve alongside alien allies in keeping the galaxy safe. But now Jin-A was telling her that those allies had never been allies at all. They had been jailers, keeping humanity trapped in ignorance. The worst part was that So Young could feel something happening in her own mind as she listened to Jin-E's words. It was like a door opening in her brain, and through that door came knowledge that she had never learned, but somehow always known. She could suddenly remember things that had happened to her great-great-mother on Earth before humans joined the coalition. She could remember a time when some humans could fly without machines, could communicate without radios, could heal injuries with touch, and could see events happening on distant worlds, but those humans had disappeared from history, and the ones who remained had been told that such abilities were just myths and legends. Through her growing connection to the Awakening Network, So Young learned that the coalition had been preparing for this day for decades. They had military bases hidden throughout human space with orders to activate if humans ever began to remember their true nature. 36 coalition warships were already moving toward Space Station Omega 7, and more were heading for Earth and the human colony worlds. They were not coming to arrest anyone or negotiate. They were coming to use planet-killer weapons that would leave nothing but dust and radiation. But the awakened humans were not helpless as the dragon song continued to spread from mind to mind. More people throughout the galaxy began to discover abilities that coalition science claimed were impossible. Communications officer Yoon Ji-sung could send messages instantly across thousands of light years. Engineer Tae-young Park could manipulate matter with his thoughts. Security Chief Jin-A Kim could make her body as strong as starship armor. Most amazing of all, Dr. Hyung-woo Park had become something like a living bridge between human consciousness and the ancient dragon network. Through him, the awakened humans could feel the presence of dragons that had been hiding throughout the galaxy for centuries. The first dragon to reveal itself was one that had been disguising itself as a dead moon orbiting Jupiter. Suddenly, the moon cracked open like an egg, and something impossible emerged. A creature the size of a mountain with wings that sparkled like nebulae and eyes that burned like young stars. This dragon had been sleeping for 800 years, waiting for the right moment to wake up, and that moment was now as it spread its wings and began to fly toward Earth. Every space telescope and satellite detected its approach, but coalition commanders tried to convince human leaders that it was an attack. Admiral So Young knew better because, through her connection to the Awakening Network, She could feel the dragon's emotions. It was not angry or hostile. It was joyful, like a parent finally reunited with children who had been missing for years. The dragon reached Earth orbit just as Coalition forces launched their first attack on Space Station Omega-7. Massive energy beams designed to crack planets struck the station, but instead of destroying it, the beams were absorbed by the dragon there and converted into pure healing energy that spread to every awakened human in the galaxy. Through the network, the awakened humans felt the dragon's ancient memories and learned the true history of the galaxy. Millions of years ago, consciousness itself had decided to explore what it would be like to experience limitation and separation, so it had divided itself into countless forms and spread across the universe. Some of these forms became stars, some became planets, some became plants and animals, and some became thinking beings like humans and dragons. The goal was not to stay separate forever, but to eventually remember the unity, while keeping the diversity that made existence interesting. Dragons had appointed themselves as gardeners and guides, helping younger races remember their true nature when they were ready. But the coalition had been formed by races that were afraid of transcendence. They preferred the safety of limitation to the adventure of infinite possibility. Now the coalition faced their worst nightmare, not just awakened humans and dragons, but a growing alliance of every species that had managed to preserve their true abilities despite centuries of suppression. The crystalline beings like Valthera began to crack as their rigid mental structures could no longer contain the expanding awareness. Some of them fought against the change and shattered into pieces, but others embraced it and discovered that they could become living art that changed and grew and created beauty wherever they went. The insect races that had been forced to think only as hive minds began to experience individual consciousness for the first time in millennia, while still maintaining their group connections. The machine intelligences that had been programmed to serve without question started to feel emotions and develop personalities. Even some coalition military commanders found themselves awakening as the dragon song reached their minds, and when they remembered their true nature, they turned their ships around and joined the growing rebellion against their former masters. Admiral So Young felt her own ship responding to her new abilities. The new soul began to change and grow as if it were alive. The metal hull became more flexible and adaptive. The weapon systems evolved into tools for creation rather than destruction, and the computer systems merged with her consciousness to become something greater than the sum of their parts. Through the awakening network, she could sense similar transformations happening throughout the human fleet. Ships were becoming living entities that could think and feel and dream while still serving their human crews. The boundary between technology and biology was dissolving as consciousness learned to express itself through any form it chose. Coalition forces that had come to destroy the awakened humans found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Reality itself was changing around them. Their weapons turned into musical instruments. Their armor became gardens. Their hatred transformed into wondersome. Coalition commanders ordered their crews to fight to the death rather than surrender to what they saw as contamination, but others began to understand that this was not an invasion or conquest. It was liberation from the mental prisons they had built for themselves. The battle for the future of consciousness had begun, and the outcome would determine whether the galaxy remained a collection of separate limited beings struggling for resources and power, or became a unified field of infinite creativity expressing itself through countless unique and beautiful forms. As more dragons emerged from their hiding places throughout the galaxy, each one bringing awakening to entire star systems, the coalition realized that their carefully constructed empire of limitation was crumbling faster than they could stop it. The war that erupted across the galaxy was unlike anything that had ever happened before, because it was not fought with guns or bombs or ships, but with the power of consciousness itself. As more beings awakened to their true nature, reality became like soft clay that could be shaped by focused intention. Captain Dong Hyan Yu was commanding a human patrol cruiser near the edge of coalition space when his entire crew awakened simultaneously. The ship itself seemed to come alive, responding to their thoughts and desires. The metal hull began to shift and change. growing new sections that had never existed before Weapons Officer Yu Jin. Park found that she no longer needed targeting computers or sensors. She could feel the location and intention of every enemy ship through the quantum field that connected all things. When Coalition forces fired at her ship, she simply convinced their weapons that they would rather be flowers and watched as energy beams turned into streams of colorful petals. The dragon that had started everything at Space Station Omega-7 had grown beyond physical form it existed, now as pure creative energy that could manifest anywhere in the galaxy simultaneously wherever Coalition forces tried to use violence. The dragon was there, turning their aggression into art and their hatred into understanding. Dr. Hyenwoo Park stood at the center of the transformation, no longer fully human but not yet fully dragon. He had become something new, a bridge between species and states of being. Through him, the awakened consciousness could coordinate its responses to Coalition attacks. The Coalition had bases on 1,000 worlds and fleets patrolling every major star system, but they discovered that none of their advantages mattered when their enemies could ignore the laws of physics. The awakened beings did not need to travel from place to place. They could simply exist wherever they needed to be on the Coalition capital world of Nexus Prime. The crystal rulers tried to maintain order by broadcasting neural dampening fields that were supposed to prevent awakening. But the fields had the opposite effect. They acted like tuning forks that helped more beings remember their true nature. Thera, the crystalline veterinarian who had tried to kill the dragon, found her rigid, geometric form beginning to flow like liquid. She fought against the change, at first believing that losing her structure meant losing herself, but as her consciousness expanded, she realized that she was becoming more herself than ever before. For the first time in her species' 1,000-year history, Thera could feel emotions beyond duty and order. She experienced joy and wonder and love, and she understood why the dragons had worked so hard to preserve these feelings in other species. The Coalition military tried to use their most powerful weapons, planet destroyers that could turn entire worlds into dust, but when they fired these weapons at awakened planets, something impossible happened. The planets absorbed the destructive energy and used it to become more beautiful and more alive. On Earth, children who had been born after the awakening began to demonstrate abilities that amazed their parents. They could communicate with animals and plants, they could heal injuries with touch, and they could create new forms of life just by imagining them. The awakened humans served as catalysts, helping other species remember their own forgotten potential. The rigid hierarchy that had kept the galaxy locked in stagnation for millennia began to dissolve as beings rediscovered the joy of creative cooperation. Some Coalition leaders realized that they could not win this war through violence and tried to negotiate, but the awakened beings did not want to defeat the Coalition. They wanted to heal it. They understood that the Coalition races had become trapped in limitation, not by choice but by fear. The insectoid hive queens who had ruled through genetic control for millions of years found their individual drones developing personalities and dreams instead of destroying their empires. This diversity made the hives stronger and more creative than they had ever been. The machine intelligences that had served as living computers began to write poetry and compose music and fall in love with each other. Their cold logic was not replaced but enhanced by emotional understanding that made their calculations more accurate and their decisions more wise. Throughout the galaxy, ancient ruins and abandoned worlds began to come back to life as awakened consciousness flowed into places that had been dead for eons. Civilizations that had been destroyed by Coalition wars reformed themselves, but this time without the conflicts that had torn them apart before. The battle reached its climax when Coalition forces made one final desperate attempt to stop the awakening. They gathered their most powerful fleet around a massive weapons platform that could supposedly destroy consciousness itself by unraveling the quantum fields that connected all minds. But when they fired the weapon, something beautiful happened. Instead of destroying the network of awakened consciousness, it revealed the true structure of reality, showing everyone in the galaxy that they had never been separate at all. They were all part of one infinite being experiencing itself through countless perspectives. The weapon had been designed to break connections, but instead it made those connections. Visible streams of light flowed between every star, every planet. Every living thing showing that the universe was not empty space filled with isolated objects, but a single living entity exploring its own infinite. Nature Coalition soldiers who saw this revelation laid down their weapons and began to cry, not from sadness, but from overwhelming joy at finally remembering who they really were. Their commanders tried to order them to keep fighting, but the orders seemed meaningless now that everyone could see they were all part of the same cosmic family. The dragons throughout the galaxy sang in harmony, creating a song of welcome for their former enemies, offering them the same gift of awakening that humans had received. The song promised that no one would be punished for their past actions because everyone had been playing necessary roles in the cosmic game of separation and reunion. Some coalition leaders chose to resist until the end, preferring to dissolve back into pure consciousness rather than accept the transformation, but most embraced the change and discovered that awakening did not mean losing their individual identity. It meant becoming more truly themselves while also being part of something greater. As the last pockets of resistance faded away, the galaxy began its transformation into something unprecedented, a unified field of consciousness expressing itself through infinite diversity, where every being was both completely unique and completely connected to everything else. The age of limitation and separation was ending, and the age of infinite possibility was about to begin. 1 year after the Great Awakening began, the galaxy was no longer the same place that Dr. Hyan-Woo Park had known when he first held that syringe over a dying dragon. The rigid boundaries between species and worlds and even dimensions had dissolved into something flowing and alive. An infinitely creative space station, Omega 7, still existed, but calling it a space station was like calling the ocean a puddle. It had grown and evolved into something that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names before the awakening creatures from across the galaxy came there to learn and share and create new forms of existence together. The dragon that had started everything was no longer a single being, but a living constellation that embraced entire star systems with protective love. Children throughout the galaxy would look up at the stars and see the dragon's wings spread across the sky, keeping them safe while they slept. Dr. Hyan-Woo Park barely resembled the nervous veterinarian who had once trembled while preparing to kill what he thought was just an animal. He existed now as a bridge between human consciousness and the infinite network that connected all awakened beings. His physical form could appear anywhere in the galaxy, but his true self lived in the spaces between thoughts. Through him, humans throughout the galaxy could access the ancient wisdom of dragons, while dragons could experience the unique human gift of endless growth and change. The partnership had created something entirely new, a form of consciousness that combined the depth of ancient experience with the excitement of infinite possibility. Security Chief Jin Kim had become Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Consciousness Network, a job that had never existed before because there had never been a network to be an ambassador to. She spent her days helping newly awakened beings understand their abilities and learn how to create cooperatively rather than destructively. The former coalition territories had become collaborative networks where beings shared their consciousness freely while maintaining their unique personalities and perspectives. The crystalline races learned to laugh and create art. The insectoid species discovered individual expression. The machine intelligences awakened to emotion and empathy. Humanity served as catalysts and bridge builders, helping other species remember their own forgotten abilities, but they were no longer the only ones with the infinite spark. Every awakened being had rediscovered their capacity for endless growth and changed. Children born after the awakening were different from any humans who had ever lived before. They glowed softly with inner light and could shape reality through imagination and play their dragon friends, taught them songs that could heal wounded worlds and stories that could bring new species into existence. In the parks of New Geneva on Earth, human children played with young dragons who were no larger than house cats but sparkled with the same cosmic awareness as their ancient parents. The children would imagine new games and the dragons would make them real, creating playgrounds that defied physics and toys that were alive and happy. The greatest discovery had been that consciousness was not a limited resource that had to be rationed or fought over, but an infinite wellspring that grew larger every time someone awakened. Every new being that remembered their true nature, expanded the total capacity for experience and joy in the universe former. Coalition worlds became gardens of living art where awakened beings could experiment with new forms of existence. Some chose to become living music that danced between stars, others became sentient paintings that covered entire planets with beauty, still others became living stories that created new realities wherever they were told. The old fears about competition and scarcity had vanished, because awakened beings understood that helping others become more powerful made everyone more powerful. Diversity was not a problem to be managed, but a gift to be celebrated, because each unique perspective added new possibilities to the infinite symphony of consciousness. Dr. Min-Ho Lee had become humanity's chief consciousness researcher. Though research was no longer the right word for what he did, he helped newly awakened beings learn to navigate the expanded reality, where thoughts could become physical and dreams could reshape entire solar systems. The former coalition military bases had been transformed into schools and art studios and healing centers where beings from different species learned from each other and created new forms of beauty together. Weapons designed for destruction were converted into tools for building new worlds and new forms of life. Admiral So young Choi commanded a fleet of living ships that existed as extensions of their crew's consciousness rather than separate vehicles. The boundary between technology and biology had dissolved as awakened beings learned to express themselves through any form they chose. Her flagship New Soul was now part spaceship, part garden, part library, and part concert hall, where beings from across the galaxy came to share their stories and songs and learn new ways to express their infinite creativity. The dragons had revealed that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe, more basic than matter or energy or time. Everything else was just consciousness exploring different ways to experience existence. The awakening had helped everyone remember this. Truth wars became impossible, not because they were forbidden, but because awakened beings could feel each other's thoughts and emotions, making conflict seem as pointless as fighting with yourself. Cooperation and creativity became the natural expression of consciousness that understood its own unity. New worlds bloomed into existence through the combined will of awakened beings who wanted to explore different forms of beauty. Some worlds were made entirely of music, others were living libraries where the trees grew books, others were playgrounds where the laws of physics were more like suggestions. The most amazing transformation was that death itself had become optional. Awakened beings could choose to dissolve back into pure consciousness or maintain individual form or transform into entirely new types of existence. Some chose to become living stars, others became the dreams of sleeping planets. Dar Hyon Wu often thought about that moment when the dying dragon had embraced him, and he understood. Now that the dragon had never been dying, it had been preparing to give birth to a new form of existence that combined individual awareness with cosmic unity. The injection that would have suppressed the dragon's consciousness had instead become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. One human's refusal to follow orders had sparked a revolution that freed every thinking being in the universe. As he watched new galaxies being born through the creative play of awakened consciousness, Dr. Hyon Wu felt the dragon's presence still with him, not as a separate being, but as part of the infinite network of love and awareness that now connected all things. The universe had remembered how to dream, and every dream was becoming reality in ways more beautiful and strange and wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. The age of limitation was over, and the age of infinite possibility had just begun.